On a crisp Saturday morning, sunlight streamed through the leaves of the towering maples that lined Elm Street, casting dappled patterns on the pavement. The gentle hum of cicadas filled the air, heralding the start of summer, yet for Amelia Parker, the relentless buzz felt worlds away from her reality. She adjusted her messy bun, wiped the sweat from her brow, and stood at the gate of her elderly neighbor's home. A cozy bungalow that had seen better days. Inside, the ticking of a clock accompanied the soft sounds of the radio playing an old-timey tune. Mrs. Henderson had always been a fountain of stories, her voice twinkling with laughter as she spoke of her youth. But lately, the once vibrant woman had become a shell of her former self, burdened by age and the weight of loneliness. The idea came to Amelia a few weeks ago, as she watched her struggle with heavy bags of groceries. What if she could lend a hand? With a welcoming smile, Amelia pushed the gate open. It creaked slightly, as if echoing the unpredictability of this spontaneous act of kindness. She stepped up onto the porch, knocking lightly before the door swung open to reveal Mrs. Henderson, her age-worn face lighting up with surprise. "Oh, Amelia," she exclaimed, her voice cracking slightly. "What a lovely surprise." "Good morning, Mrs. Henderson. I thought I'd come by to help you with a little spring cleaning. If you don't mind," Amelia said, stepping inside and taking in the subtle scent of lavender and something baking. "Oh dear, how wonderful. I can't seem to keep up with this old place anymore," Mrs. Henderson replied, her features softening. "You're a godsend." Amelia smiled back, but inside, a storm of insecurities brewed. She had recently graduated from college, her dreams overshadowed by student loans and a bleak job market. This simple act felt like a refuge, a way to escape her worries and connect with someone who needed her. As she rolled up her sleeves and her fate intertwined with that of her neighbor, a small sense of purpose blossomed within her. She followed the older woman into the living room, where dust danced in the shafts of light breaking through the sheer curtains. The room was filled with memories, framed photographs of a vibrant life, a floral printed couch that sagged with character, and a worn quilt draped over an armchair. It was a space full of history, yet Amelia sensed an air of neglect that saddened her. "Let's start with the windows, shall we?" Mrs. Henderson suggested, pulling supplies from a nearby cupboard. As they worked side by side, their chatter flowed easily, light-hearted banter peppered with stories of the past and dreams of the future. Mrs. Henderson spoke of her garden, her late husband's love for woodworking, and her fond memories of family gatherings. Amelia listened intently, her own worries dissipating like the dust they swept away. "What do you want to do?" Mrs. Henderson suddenly asked, breaking the rhythm of their conversation. "Honestly, I'm not sure," Amelia admitted, her gaze shifting to a family photo where Mrs. Henderson beamed alongside smiling faces. "I've been looking for a job in my field, but everything feels so competitive, and I don't know, it's all a bit much." Mrs. Henderson's eyes glimmered with empathy. "You're young, dear. The world feels daunting right now, but you have time. Remember, every little step counts. You're already making a difference here today." Amelia's heart swelled at the genuine encouragement, an invisible thread of connection weaving between them. Their laughter echoed through the nearly empty rooms, and as Amelia wiped a bead of sweat from her brow, she noticed Mrs. Henderson's spirit lifting with each returned smile. By the time they put down their cleaning supplies, the sun hung low in the sky, sending rich golden rays spilling through the freshly cleaned windows. They sank into the couch together, exhausted but satisfied, the room now bursting with life. "Thank you so much, Amelia," Mrs. Henderson said softly, brushing a few stray hairs back from her forehead. "I feel like I can breathe again." The warmth of her gratitude wrapped around Amelia like a hug. "I'm glad. I'd love to help again. Just let me know." As she left that day, Amelia cast one last glance back at the house, light spilling from its windows like the laughter they had shared, a promise of a friendship newly sparked. Unbeknownst to them, the impact of that day would ripple far beyond the two of them. Weeks passed, and the memory of that Saturday lingered sweetly in Amelia's mind. a bright spot amid the drudgery of job applications and unanswered emails. In her heart, she knew she had offered more than just a helping hand she had connected. That evening, as she pored over yet another application, a knock echoed from the door, pulling her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Mrs. Henderson, a vibrant energy radiating from her, as if she had stepped into the sunlight itself. "Amelia, dear. You won't believe what happened today." Her eyes sparkled with excitement. "A friend of mine came over. He's one of those wealthy sorts, but he has a good heart. I told him about you and your kindness, and he's looking for someone to help him manage projects for his charity work. Would you be interested in a position?" Amelia's heart raced as she processed the words. The turn of fate resembled the brightest colors of her dreams, yet it was clouded with disbelief. "Are you serious?" "Absolutely," Mrs. Henderson insisted, her enthusiasm infectious. "He is a lovely man, and I think he would be perfect for you. He's all about helping others, just like you did for me." Suddenly, the walls of doubt that had encased Amelia began to crumble. All the effort she had poured into that one small act had unexpectedly planted a seed. The smile on her face widened as she thought about the potential that lay before her, a chance to not only work but to be part of something meaningful, stemming from kindness, a reminder of the connection that can flourish among strangers. "I'd love to meet him," she whispered, the hope inside her heart swelling like the crescendo of a familiar song, propelling her toward something brighter. The threads of their lives were stitching together, weaving a tapestry of empathy, opportunity, and resilience that would guide her forward. The sun hung low in the sky as Amelia Parker realized her act of kindness toward Mrs. Henderson had set off a chain of events she could have never predicted. After the whirlwind of their first cleaning day and the astonishing offer from Mrs. Henderson's wealthy friend, she found herself engulfed in a world of new connections, challenges, and growth. The days following the conversation were filled with excitement but also trepidation. Each evening, Amelia sat at her desk, her laptop illuminating the room around her, as she prepared for a meeting with Mr. Harrington, a community leader whose philanthropic efforts had transformed neighborhoods. The connection to him felt like a golden opportunity, yet doubts gnawed at her. What if she wasn't enough? What if they found out she was simply a college graduate floundering in a sea of job applications? "Amelia, relax. You've got this," her younger sister, Lily, reassured her one evening as they shared frozen pizzas. "You're smart, and Mrs. Henderson wouldn't be touting how great you are if she didn't really believe it." Amelia smiled weakly. "I know, but it's intimidating. He's been running successful charities for years and he needs fresh ideas. You're a recent graduate full of energy. Be confident." Lily leaned forward, her golden curls bouncing with passion. The encouragement tucked itself away in Amelia's heart, feeding her resolve. On the day of the meeting, she dressed carefully, choosing a floral blouse that brought out the warmth in her complexion. Her hands trembled slightly, a mix of nerves and excitement, as she arrived at the community center where the meeting was to take place. The building stood tall against the urban skyline, a gleaming beacon of hope for many. As she entered, Amelia was struck by the decor. Photographs of past events hung proudly on the walls, showcasing members of the community engaged in laughter, learning, and giving. This was where she wanted to be. This was the change she longed to inspire. Mr. Harrington greeted her with a firm handshake, his demeanor warm yet professional. "Amelia, so wonderful to meet you. Mrs. Henderson has told me some wonderful things." His eyes shone with sincerity. "You've already made a big difference in her life. I'm eager to hear your ideas." As they discussed potential projects, Amelia found herself reflecting on her own experiences. "My biggest passion is community engagement," she explained. "I think small acts of kindness can inspire larger movements. Organizing workshops where neighbors help each other with skills like gardening or cooking would not only build connections but also create a sense of belonging." Mr. Harrington nodded thoughtfully, his interest piqued. "I love that. It's simple yet powerful. We can amplify that message through social media and events." As they brainstormed, Amelia felt her confidence begin to bloom, each suggestion met with excitement and encouragement. Within hours, Mr. Harrington leaned back, grinning. "You've given me some fantastic ideas. I'd love for you to help implement some of these. Maybe you could even start as an intern with the potential for a full-time position once you gain more experience." Thrilled, Amelia realized this opportunity was exactly what she'd needed. It wasn't just about the job, it was about building something meaningful with the community she had come to love. Weeks flew by as Amelia immersed herself in her new responsibilities. She spent hours planning community gatherings, organizing workshops, and gaining first-hand experience in event management. The laughter echoing through streets during these workshops became evidence that kindness was indeed a catalyst for connection. Neighbors offered to share their skills, baking bread for cooking classes or teaching children to plant flowers. Young and old alike rallied together, forming bonds that transcended age and background. Yet, with the high of this newfound purpose came challenges that tested her resolve. Mrs. Henderson's health began to decline, the vibrant sparkle in her eyes flickered beneath the weight of illness. Amelia had always seen her as a mentor, but now she felt the heavy burden of uncertainty. Should she focus on work or be there for her friend? The choice weighed on her, threatening to unravel the joy she had found. One afternoon, Amelia perched beside Mrs. Henderson's hospital bed, squeezing her hand gently. "You're going to get through this. I know it." Mrs. Henderson, frail but ever resilient, smiled weakly. "Darling, life has its seasons, doesn't it? Just don't let fear send you running," she murmured. "You're blossoming, Amelia. I see it." Those words lingered in Amelia's mind, instilling a sense of urgency to make a difference beyond herself. Inspired, she began to organize a fundraising event for the local healthcare initiative, aiming to support programs that bettered the lives of seniors in the community. Planning became her therapy, as she channeled her worries into a greater cause. Amelia pored over spreadsheets and phone calls, learning the ins and outs of nonprofit fundraising. She enlisted the help of neighbors, volunteers from her workshops, and even reached out to local businesses for sponsorships. As the event drew closer, excitement rippled through the community. They were all hungry for a chance to combine their new friendships with a purpose that would help their beloved Mrs. Henderson and others like her. However, not all was smooth sailing. The night before the fundraising gala, disaster struck. Amelia received a frantic call from the caterer, a last-minute cancellation leaving her scrambling to find food for the next day's event. Panic surged in her veins. What if all her efforts fell apart because of something she couldn't control? In that moment of despair, instead of succumbing to frustration, Amelia reached out to her community. Help she posted in the neighborhood group chat. "We need food for tomorrow's gala. Anyone available to pitch in?" Responses flooded in faster than she could read. Neighbors rallied and brought dishes they'd prepared, from lasagna and salads to desserts that made her mouth water. The outpouring of support reminded her of the strength of their connections. Her heart swelled as she realized just how far kindness had come full circle. On the night of the gala, as Amelia stood before a bustling crowd, her heart raced with pride. The community filled the hall, laughter and chatter intertwining with the soft strains of music. Tables gleamed under fairy lights, transformed by the culinary delights donated by their neighbors. Mr. Harrington took the stage, and as he spoke about the importance of support systems, Amelia felt the anticipation in the air. Together, they had created not just an event, but a movement. People were now invested in the growth of their community. They weren't just gathering, they were giving hope, compassion, and love. In a moment of vulnerability, Amelia stepped forward, feeling a wave of strength wash over her. "I'm incredibly grateful for all of you tonight," she began, her voice shaking slightly, but she pressed on. "What started as a simple act of kindness has transformed us into a family. Mrs. Henderson inspired me, and now we can inspire others. Let's continue to help one another." With passionate applause, Amelia's spirit soared. Contributions poured in that night, far exceeding her expectations. And while their efforts would go on to support healthcare initiatives, Amelia understood none of this would have been possible without the web of relationships that kindness had spun. As the evening drew to a close, Amelia's phone buzzed with a message, a photo from Mrs. Henderson's daughter, a picture of the elderly woman watching the live-streamed health fundraiser from her hospital bed, surrounded by flowers and heartfelt messages from the community. The sight filled Amelia's heart with warmth. Returning to Mrs. Henderson later that week, Amelia knelt next to her bed, holding her hands, knowing her friend had watched her bloom. "You've inspired so many," she said softly. "Look what we achieved together." Tears welled in Mrs. Henderson's eyes as she squeezed Amelia's hands tightly. "It's you who inspired us all, dear. Keep believing in the power of what you've started." With those words echoing in her mind, Amelia realized that she was only just beginning her journey. Challenges would come, but she had learned that shared kindness could carry them through. Emerging from her own uncertainties, she found not only a deeper understanding of herself but a newfound commitment to serve others, a venture that would continue as long as she had breath in her lungs. Amelia stood at the threshold of her dreams, a path illuminated by love and community. No wealth was greater than the connections they nurtured together. And as her heart swelled with a renewed sense of purpose, she felt forever bound to this journey of kindness, a legacy woven into the fabric of her life. Amelia Parker stood by the kitchen window, watching the sun filter through the leaves of the old oak tree in Mrs. Henderson's front yard. The vibrant green branches swayed gently, as if in rhythm with the joyful melodies of the world outside. It had been a few weeks since the elderly woman's wealthy friend had reached out to her, and as she wiped the last of the breakfast dishes, Amelia felt a growing sense of realization and purpose blossom within her. The moment she accepted the internship with Mr. Harrington, her life had begun to take shape in ways she hadn't anticipated. Suddenly, she was surrounded by a community of like-minded individuals, each eager to make an impact. They spent their days planning new initiatives designed to uplift those in need, discovering creative ways to bring people together, all rooted in the belief that kindness could spark change. Amelia had settled into this nurturing environment, growing more confident with every meeting that passed. Every week brought new developments, new events to plan, and an ever-expanding web of connections. Whether it was launching a community garden, setting up workshops for skill sharing, or organizing volunteer days, she felt the echoes of that first Saturday spent cleaning Mrs. Henderson's home echoing strongly in her heart. Amelia's relationship with Mrs. Henderson deepened too. They had become inseparable companions, their bond uniting them in laughter and shared stories. On Sundays, they would host tea parties filled with baking disasters, reminiscences of older times, and animated games that often ended with both women in fits of laughter. Even on the most monotonous days, Mrs. Henderson's delightful anecdotes would spark joy in Amelia, and their hearts danced in the warmth of an unbreakable friendship. Just the other day, over steaming cups of jasmine tea, they discussed the garden they had planted together in Mrs. Henderson's backyard, filled with blooming daisies, vibrant marigolds, and fragrant herbs. "Look at what you've helped me do," her neighbor said, her eyes twinkling with pride. "This garden is almost as vibrant as you are, dear." "It's not just me," Amelia retorted playfully. "You're the one who taught me to dig and plant," she chuckled, recalling the way they had both ended up rather muddied in their gardening escapade. But the warmth of their companionship wasn't just behind the facade of laughter. Time and again, Amelia reflected on the stubborn presences of loneliness that both she and Mrs. Henderson had clawed through, that deep-seated feeling of isolation that often lingers, reaching beyond age and circumstance. Through their friendship, both women found reprieve, and as Amelia spent more time with Mrs. Henderson, her own fears of inadequacy slowly quieted with the knowledge that genuine connection could wash away shadows of doubt. Yet, Amelia knew she could not lose sight of her long-term aspirations. Inspired by everything she'd learned at the charity and the meaningful relationships she'd formed, she set herself more challenging goals. She had taken on coordinating a funding gala that would support initiatives for mental health awareness in the community, a subject she felt intimately connected to given her experiences of anxiety and uncertainty. As the event neared, she found herself huddled in the office week after week, often long into the night, determined not to let the people counting on her down. Her heart raced at the thought of presenting her plan to the board, of opening the conversation about mental health to a broader audience. The words that had once fled her mind and tongue now flowed freely like bubbling streams, sprouting effortlessly as she penned the details of the gala. Meanwhile, Mrs. Henderson rallied her circle of friends, a group of women fiercely dedicated to changing lives, just as she had. Their coffee-catching sessions brimmed with inventive ideas for securing donations and forming connections, friendships built on the cornerstone of compassion. During those chats, Amelia felt an overwhelming gratitude for her older friend. "I never would have had the courage to even think about putting together an event without you," Mrs. Henderson, she confided one afternoon, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Darling, you have the fire within you. You were always meant to be a voice for those who feel unheard," Mrs. Henderson replied softly. "I merely lit the touch paper, now you're the one blazing brightly." As Amelia's confidence grew, she left behind lingering insecurities like leaves being swept up by the wind. She envisioned a future in which her dreams and aspirations could merge with the needs of others, building a sense of community that thrived on kindness. At the same time, the event soon transformed into a reflection of not just her vision, but also of their enduring friendship, a symbol for all they valued together. The day of the funding gala unfurled under a postcard-perfect sky, the sun glowing warmly overhead. The community center buzzed with excitement as local artists set up their displays, vendors prepared their stands, and friends caught up with one another amidst the energy of the event. Amelia could hardly contain her excitement. This was the culmination of her tireless efforts, her friends' commitment, and Mrs. Henderson's unwavering support. Guests arrived, transforming the hall into a tapestry of mingling voices and laughter. She watched them drift from stall to stall, forming connections and deepening friendships, just as they had learned to do through small acts of kindness. As the evening went on, Mr. Harrington beamed from the podium, showcasing the remarkable contributions of local business owners, artists, and volunteers who had poured their hearts into the cause, celebrating the interconnectedness their community had forged. As Amelia shared her vision and spoke from the heart about shifting the narrative around mental health, she felt an overwhelming pride rise within her. This gathering was not about the funds they'd raise alone, but the relationships they cultivated, the stories they shared, and the connections they built. The applause echoing around her wasn't just applause, it was a resounding affirmation of hope. Once the event wrapped up and everyone had departed, Amelia remained behind with a small group of friends to count donations, sharing excited chatter and creating plans for future initiatives. As they sifted through the raised funds, it became clear that the night had surpassed everyone's expectations. Hundreds of families would benefit from what they had come together to create. "Amelia, you are amazing," Emily, one of her fellow volunteers, exclaimed, her eyes sparkling. "You turned this whole thing into reality." "I couldn't have done it without all of you," Amelia replied, humility washing over her. "It's the power of community." Later that week, as Amelia sat in the office preparing reports for Mr. Harrington, she stumbled upon a video message from Mrs. Henderson's daughter. She tapped play, and there on her screen was her dear friend, beaming with pride, surrounded by flowers that echoed the summer's warmth. "Darling," the elderly woman began, her voice slightly strained, "I couldn't attend the gala, but I wanted you to know how proud I am of you. You've touched the lives of many, including my own. I feel so lucky to be a part of your journey." Tears glimmered in Amelia's eyes as she reflected on how far they had both come. The warmth of that friendship fueled her with courage and resilience. Each experience, every shared moment, had blossomed into a world that radiated kindness. In the following months, as Amelia continued to dive headfirst into her newfound role at the charity, her efforts began to yield even more fruit. She initiated programs focused on mental health resource accessibility and engaged local schools in conversations about well-being, spirits lifting within families and individuals, recognizing their struggles and vulnerabilities as shared human experiences rather than sources of shame. With every speech she gave, every meeting she coordinated, Amelia remained firmly anchored in the love and kindness that Mrs. Henderson had woven into her life, a beautiful reminder of how meaningful it was to help others flourish. And she knew Mrs. Henderson was always in her corner, cheering her on as she stepped into a world filled with potential. One sunny afternoon, Amelia returned to Mrs. Henderson's home this time. It was a day of celebration. The vibrant garden overflowed with flowers, beaming in the warmth of the afternoon sunlight. That week marked a significant milestone. A local newspaper would be publishing an article about Amelia, showcasing not only her journey but also the wonderful synergy between generations that they had fostered together. "Darling, look at you, a true visionary," Mrs. Henderson exclaimed when Amelia revealed the news. They both stood in the garden among butterflies that danced amidst the blossoms, and Amelia felt the thrill of possibility surge through her. "Thank you for everything you've done to inspire me," Mrs. Henderson, Amelia said genuinely, warmth flooding through the connection they had nurtured. "You put me on this journey." Pride gleamed in Mrs. Henderson's eyes. "And you've taken it so much further. Remember, darling, kindness will always be your compass." As the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the world in hues of orange and violet, Amelia realized that kindness was indeed the heart of it all. That weekend, as she reflected on her journey from that initial Saturday cleaning to an email filled with articles featuring her achievements, one truth resounded powerfully in her heart: every act of kindness creates ripples, spreading hope that transcends individual moments. And when moments grew heavy under the weight of doubt, she knew she had only to look toward her garden behind her, the flowers, colors, and friendships that had bloomed, all woven together by their shared stories. The world felt brighter, filled with endless potential, and Amelia resolved to nurture that light in any way she could. From then on, she took it upon herself to instill the value of kindness in the community, believing that even the smallest acts could create lasting changes. Amelia organized workshops to empower others to share their skills, encouraging them to cultivate connections that would inspire further kindness, creating a cyclical cycle of love and support. As she wandered through the streets of her town, a place rich in memories and connections, Amelia often found herself at the local coffee shop, where she would chat with familiar faces and offer a smile to passers-by. Each laugh she shared, every kind word exchanged felt meaningful, tangible proof that her efforts had woven a tapestry of connection throughout the entire neighborhood. In the months and years to come, Amelia carried within her the strength of her bond with Mrs. Henderson, and an unshakable belief in the power of kindness, the staffing of connections that transcended generations, the fusion of hope and resilience. And as Amelia ventured forth into new horizons, she warmed herself in the knowledge that wherever life led her, kindness would illuminate her way. Every hand extended toward someone in need had the power to create lasting change, to build bridges between hearts and inspire a collective resilience that would echo through the alleys of time, ensuring that empathy remained forever part of their human experience. With a sparkle in her eye and a heart full of gratitude, Amelia stepped into her next chapter, forever propelled by the light of kindness and everlasting connection she would nurture and share with the world, just as Mrs. Henderson had nurtured her.